When Diana arrived at the palace, she had one ally among the senior royals, the Queen Mother. Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon took Diana under her wing, taught her protocol, made her feel welcome. Within 3 years, the same woman was calling Diana a threat to the monarchy and actively supporting Charles's affair with Camilla. What changed? Diana got famous, more famous than any of them. And here's what nobody talks about when they tell this story. We always name the same villains: Charles, Camilla, maybe the palace, this faceless, shapeless machine that chewed Diana up and spat her out. But there was one specific woman who did more to destroy Diana's position from the inside than any of them. A woman who had the Queen's ear in a way nobody else on earth did. A woman who'd already destroyed someone she saw as a threat to the crown, and held that grudge for half a century without blinking. The Queen Mother wasn't a bystander in Diana's story. She was the architect. And the reason she was so dangerous? Because she started out as Diana's biggest supporter. This isn't a story about Charles and Camilla. It's the story of how the most beloved old lady in Britain turned against the most famous woman in the world, and why that betrayal mattered more than anything Charles or Camilla ever did. Let's start at the beginning. When 19-year-old Lady Diana Spencer started dating the Prince of Wales in the summer of 1980, she wasn't some stranger wandering into foreign territory. Diana's maternal grandmother, Ruth, Lady Fermoy, had been one of the Queen Mother's closest friends for over 30 years. They shared a box at the Royal Albert Hall. They played cards together at Clarence House. They moved in the same tiny aristocratic orbit where everybody knew everybody, and loyalty to the crown was the unspoken price of entry. Diana's family rented Park House directly from the Queen, right there on the Sandringham estate. Her father had served as equerry to King George VI. The Spencers were, in every way that mattered to people like Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, one of us. That mattered enormously, because in 1980, the royal family had a problem, and his name was Charles. He was 31. He'd been linked to a string of women the press deemed unsuitable, and the relationship everyone in the family knew about, the one with Camilla Parker Bowles, was completely off the table. Camilla was married. Camilla wasn't a virgin. In 1980, those things still mattered for the wife of a future king, and the Queen Mother understood this better than anyone alive. So when a young, aristocratic, beautiful girl from the right family appeared, a girl with no past, no scandal, and no opinions anyone had noticed, the Queen Mother saw exactly what she needed to see: a solution. Tina Brown documented in the Diana Chronicles that the Queen Mother actively encouraged the match. She didn't just approve of Diana from a polite distance. She advocated for her. Right girl, right family, right temperament. Or so it appeared. But here's the part that makes everything that comes later so much worse. The Queen Mother didn't just sign off on the engagement. She welcomed Diana personally. During those bewildering months between Diana's first dates with Charles and the engagement announcement on February 24, 1981, Diana visited Clarence House, the Queen Mother's London residence on the Mall, multiple times. The Queen Mother received her with that legendary warmth, the kind of charm that could make a nervous teenager feel like the most important person in the room. Sarah Bradford described the Queen Mother making a particular effort to put Diana at ease. Conversations about life at court, reassurance about what lay ahead, the sort of maternal warmth that Diana, whose own mother had left the family when Diana was just 6, was desperate for. Think about that. Diana had lost her mother as a child, and now here was this grand, powerful, kind woman, the most respected figure in the entire family, opening her arms and saying, "You belong here. I'll look after you." Diana believed it. Why wouldn't she? In the months around the wedding on July 29, 1981, the Queen Mother continued playing this role. Staff at Clarence House from this period described her speaking approvingly of Diana, her beauty, her charm, her effect on the public. The word they kept using was potential. Diana had potential. But potential to be what, exactly? Here's what the Queen Mother actually wanted. She wanted a younger, prettier version of herself. A woman who would smile beautifully, say very little of substance, and never, under any circumstances, outshine the institution she'd married into. The Queen Mother had spent 60 years perfecting that template. She was the original. Diana was supposed to be the copy. For about 2 years, it looked like the plan was working. Then came Australia. March 1983. Diana is 21 years old. She and Charles are sent on a 6-week royal tour of Australia and New Zealand, her first major international engagement. It's supposed to be routine. Charles is the principal, Diana is the supporting act. That is not what happened. What happened was a phenomenon. Tens of thousands turned out, not for Charles, for her. When the couple split to work opposite sides of the street, the way royals do, audible groans went up from whichever side got Charles. The Australian press called it Diana mania, and it didn't build slowly. It hit like a wave on day one and never stopped. Charles was humiliated. Biographers documented his cutting remarks to Diana during the tour, his visible irritation at being upstaged. Here was the Prince of Wales, the man who'd been the star of royal tours for over a decade, reduced to a warm-up act for his own wife. But Charles's jealousy was a personal problem between a husband and wife. What happened next was institutional. Reports filtered back to the palace in real time, and the Queen Mother, who monitored the public standing of the monarchy with the vigilance of a general watching a battlefield, understood immediately what the Australia tour meant. Diana had become famous. Not famous the way royals were supposed to be famous, as dignified representatives of an ancient institution. Famous the way film stars are famous. Famous as an individual. Famous in a way that made the institution look like her backdrop, rather than her purpose. This was the one thing the Queen Mother could not tolerate. Not because she was petty, not because she was jealous in some simple human way, but because Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon had spent her entire life operating on one unbreakable principle. The institution is always bigger than the individual. Always. The moment one person becomes more famous than the crown itself, the crown is in danger. She knew this because she'd seen it happen before. December 11th, 1936. King Edward VIII abdicates the throne to marry Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee the Queen Mother blamed, for the rest of her life, for destroying the monarchy's stability. That abdication forced Elizabeth's husband, the shy, stammering Duke of York, onto the throne as King George VI. A role he never wanted, a role the Queen Mother believed killed him. George VI died at 56 in 1952. She never forgave Wallis Simpson, not when Wallis attended the funeral, not when Wallis grew old and frail in Paris, not when Wallis died in 1986. Hugo Vickers documented this in his biography as one of the defining characteristics of Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon's personality. This capacity for an extraordinary warmth toward those who served the monarchy, and an extraordinary coldness toward anyone she perceived as threatening it. The grudge lasted over 50 years, and it wasn't passive. She actively ensured Wallis was excluded from royal events, never welcomed back, never acknowledged. 50 years. Cold, calculated, unforgiving. Now, Diana wasn't Wallis Simpson. She hadn't seduced a king away from his duty. She hadn't asked for the fame that was swallowing her whole. But in the Queen Mother's mind, the effect was identical. One woman was becoming bigger than the institution. The difference? Wallis was an outsider. You could exile her. Diana was inside the family. She was the Princess of Wales. She was the mother of the future king. You can't exile that. You have to destroy it from within. Between 1983 and 1985, the warmth drained out of the Queen Mother's relationship with Diana like heat leaving a room. It wasn't dramatic. There was no confrontation. That wasn't how the Queen Mother operated. The invitations to Clarence House became less frequent. The approving comments to staff gave way to concerned observations about Diana's emotional behavior, her inability to conform, her refusal to maintain the stoic facade the Queen Mother considered the fundamental requirement of being royal. Because here's what Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon could not abide. Diana wore her feelings visibly. She cried. She made it obvious she was unhappy. And the Queen Mother, whose entire public philosophy was never complain, never explain, saw that emotional transparency not as a personality trait, but as an existential threat. If the public could see Diana was suffering, they'd ask who was making her suffer. And that question led straight to Charles, to Camilla, and to the family itself. Diana's pain was making the monarchy look bad. The Queen Mother decided that the problem was Diana's pain, not the things causing it. And that's when the campaign started. What the Queen Mother did next wasn't passive disapproval. It wasn't an old woman tutting about the younger generation over afternoon tea. It was a deliberate, sustained effort to undermine Diana's position inside the family, and to prop up the very woman who was destroying Diana's marriage. The Queen Mother supported Camilla Parker Bowles, openly, consistently, while the rest of the royal family maintained at least a pretense of neutrality about Charles's affair. The Queen Mother made her sympathies unmistakable. Camilla was invited to Burke Hall, the Queen Mother's private residence on the Balmoral estate, where she controlled the guest list with absolute authority. Being invited to Burke Hall was a signal. It meant you had the Queen Mother's favor. Camilla received that signal again and again throughout the late 1980s and into the 1990s. Tina Brown documented in both the Diana Chronicles and the Palace Papers that the Queen Mother considered Camilla a far more suitable companion for Charles than Diana ever was. Not because Camilla was a better person, because Camilla understood the rules. Camilla was discreet. Camilla didn't seek the spotlight. Camilla was happy to exist in the shadows, supporting Charles without competing with him for a single headline. The bitter irony is staggering. The Queen Mother, the moral center of the royal family, the woman who represented duty and propriety and traditional values, was endorsing an adulterous affair. Because the affair served the institution, the legitimate marriage threatened it. But the Queen Mother's most devastating weapon wasn't her social calendar. It was her access to the Queen. Elizabeth II deferred to her mother on family matters in a way she deferred to nobody else. The Queen Mother was the only person alive who could speak to the sovereign as a parent, not a subject. Advisors could recommend. Prime ministers could argue. Only the Queen Mother could walk into a room and reshape the Queen's thinking with a word. She used that access systematically. Biographers, including Bradford and Brown, described the Queen Mother advising her daughter that Diana was unstable, that Diana's emotional outbursts were a sign of fundamental unsuitability for royal life, that the family's priority should be protecting Charles and the institution, not accommodating Diana's needs. The Queen didn't need much convincing. Elizabeth II was herself uncomfortable with emotional displays. She'd been raised by the Queen Mother to believe that personal feelings were never a reason to deviate from duty. But the Queen Mother's consistent messaging made sure any sympathetic impulse the Queen might have felt toward her daughter-in-law was extinguished before it could take hold. And then there was Balmoral, the annual summer gathering of the royal family, the social heart of their private world. and the Queen Mother's territory in a way that Buckingham Palace never was. At the palace, formal protocol governed everything. There were limits to how openly you could marginalize someone. But at Balmoral, in the supposed informality of country life, power was exercised through 1,000 small decisions. Who sat where at dinner? Which activities were organized? Who was included in conversations? And who was left standing at the edge of the room, watching everyone else laugh at jokes she didn't understand? Diana was increasingly frozen out. Seating arrangements that placed her far from the center, activities organized around pursuits she didn't enjoy. The Queen Mother could have eased Diana's discomfort the way she had in the early years. Instead, she designed the discomfort. Charles was the Queen Mother's favorite grandchild. That bond was documented throughout their lives. He visited her regularly, confided in her, shared her love of art and history. When his marriage was crumbling, it was the Queen Mother he turned to for validation, and she gave it. Completely. She told him, in effect, that the problem was Diana, that his wife's emotional demands were unreasonable, that his attachment to Camilla was understandable, that the family would stand behind him. Consider what that council actually did. It removed any incentive Charles might have had to compromise, to seek help, to try. Why would he, when the most respected woman in the family was telling him he was already right? The Queen Mother didn't just support Charles's affair with Camilla. She made reconciliation with Diana impossible. The Guardian reported, drawing on biographical sources, that the Queen Mother's justly famous charm concealed a woman of remarkable ruthlessness when she perceived the institution under threat. Staff at Clarence House and Balmoral knew the smiling, gin-loving grandmother was also someone who could freeze you out of her life with a single glance. She'd done it before. Marion Crawford, Crawfie, the royal governess who raised Elizabeth and Margaret. In 1950, she published a memoir called The Little Princesses. By modern standards, it was extraordinarily mild, affectionate, admiring, barely critical. The Queen Mother treated it as treason. Crawford was cut off completely, never forgiven. She died in obscurity in 1988. Her letters to the Queen Mother returned unopened. That was the lesson. The Queen Mother's warmth lasted exactly as long as your loyalty, not 1 second longer. Diana's loyalty hadn't wavered, but her fame had made loyalty irrelevant. She'd committed the unforgivable sin of becoming bigger than the family itself. The Queen Mother reportedly characterized Diana as a threat to the monarchy. The same language, the same charge she'd leveled at Wallis Simpson decades earlier. In the Queen Mother's vocabulary, there was no more serious accusation. It meant you were an enemy of the crown, and enemies of the crown had to be dealt with. Diana wasn't naive about what was happening. It took her years to identify all the forces arrayed against her, but she got there. In the secret recordings she made for Andrew Morton, the tapes that became the explosive 1992 book, Diana, Her True Story, she spoke about her isolation inside the family, the systematic withdrawal of support. The people who had once welcomed her simply stopped being there. Her primary focus was Charles and Camilla, the immediate, visible wound. But she also addressed the broader dynamics, and the Queen Mother was part of that accounting. Diana's reference to the Queen Mother's justly famous charm, a phrase absolutely dripping with sarcasm, tells you everything about what she had come to understand. That charm was a weapon, not a gift. She'd experienced it when she was useful, when she was compliant. The moment she stopped fitting the mold, it vanished. What Diana came to grasp was that her enemies weren't just Charles and Camilla. The opposition came from above, way above. From the matriarch who sat at the very top of the family's private hierarchy and had decided, with the same cold precision she'd applied to Wallis Simpson and Crawfie and anyone else who crossed her, that Diana had to go. Not go as in leave, go as in be neutralized, marginalized, stripped of influence until she was nothing more than a body in a tiara at state dinners, smiling, silent, and broken. The Queen Mother won that battle inside the palace, completely. By the time the separation was announced in December 1992, Diana had been systematically isolated from every support structure within the royal family. The Queen Mother's influence over her daughter, over Charles, over the social dynamics at every royal residence, all of it had been weaponized against one woman. But here's the thing about winning inside the palace. The palace isn't the world. Diana lost the institution. She won everything else. The Queen Mother spent her final years watching something she couldn't control and couldn't destroy. Diana's legend growing. Growing after the separation. Growing after the divorce. Growing, impossibly, after Diana's death on August 31st, 1997. When the Queen Mother died on March 30th, 2002, at the age of 101, she was widely mourned. Respectful crowds gathered. The funeral was dignified and grand. But Diana, dead nearly 5 years by then, was already immortal. The Queen Mother's greatest fear had been that one woman would overshadow the monarchy, and that fear came true. Not in spite of how the palace treated Diana, but because of it. The cruelty, the isolation, the systematic destruction of her position, all of it created the narrative of betrayal that made Diana a legend. The palace's own treatment of her became the story, and the Queen Mother was the architect of that treatment. She built the machine that created the very thing she was trying to prevent. The woman who spent 60 years protecting the crown from threats ended up creating the biggest one. Not through some external crisis, through her own ruthless, calculated, devastatingly effective campaign against a girl she'd once welcomed with open arms at Clarence House. That's not irony. That's tragedy. 2 women, 1 institution, and a betrayal that shaped the British monarchy for the next 30 years. If this story surprised you, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from.